Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is the BK Apologist, transmitting all the way live. New York is the city, Brooklyn is the borough. What's good, what's popping? I'm glad that we can spend this time together on a Monday. As promised, one of my favorite scholars is in the building, somebody who I've been reading for quite a bit, and it's definitely been a paradigm shift in my Bible study. Of course, I'm talking about Dr. Michael Heiser. How are you doing today, sir?
Yeah, very good. Thanks for having me.
Oh man, it is such an honor to have you. Yeah, it's really great. Now, how I got to know you, I was actually looking for more material about Ezekiel's will.
Okay.
And of course, I knew it wasn't UFO, but a lot of people that I deal with have that interpretation. So I was just looking for more material. And you know how, the YouTube, they recommend things, and before you know it, you're going down this rabbit trail.
Mm-hmm.
And then I see you at a UFO conference.
Yeah.
A Christian. I'm like, what is a Christian doing at a UFO conference?
Right.
And that's when I saw you critiquing Zechariah Sitchin, and
Okay.
it was pretty amazing stuff. So how did you even get involved in those type of arenas?
Yeah, I sort of got sucked into the vortex in 2001. Really in the wake of writing my novel, my first novel, The Facade. Mm. So, I mean, I'd always been interested in anything old and weird, and I had a year to burn, or so I told myself. I had a year to burn on what should have been my dissertation. I had just gotten through prelims, as a doctoral student, and honestly, I was kind of burned out. I didn't really feel like writing anything serious, so I thought, I'm just going to take a year and do this thing I've always wanted to do and write a novel. I had a late night third shift security job.
Wow.
I had it for years. I worked full time, 15 years going through grad school. I listened to Coast AM. I was just, I was real familiar with all that stuff. I had a command of ancient texts. I'd always been into UFOs, and I just thought I'm going to throw it all into a blender and just, have fun with it. But the shtick was everything has to be real. It's just what I do with the data points, And so I wrote this novel, and it was kind of like just a personal thing. I had a friend read it, and they said, "Hey, you should, try to get on the Art Bell show." It was the Art Bell show then, Coast to Coast. And I thought, that'd be fun, And we thought it was kind of a joke because we thought he'd be surrounded by a phalanx of, people, like we'd never get to him. So my friend sent an email off, and then like 2 days later, I'm coming back from school, and my wife meets me at the door and says, "You're not going to believe who I just got off the phone with. It was Art Bell." And he wants you to call him back. So I did. Sure enough, it's Art, and then the rest is sort of history. I wound up going on the show. I've been on the show 34 times now.
Wow. And
I've sort of turned into the nice Bible debunking nonsense guy, and it's always ancient aliens and stuff like that. Even with George, George Norrie's the host now. Mm. But once I did that the first time, then I started getting invitations to speak at UFO conferences. And the thing that your listeners should know is nobody vetted me.
Oh, wow.
Nobody vetted me at all, and so I'm getting all these invitations, and I accepted a few. I thought it would be fun.
I mean, did they know what you was bringing?
Apparently not, because they, the first one I did was the Bay Area UFO conference, and it was the week after 9/11. Mm. So it was really hard to get there. It was in San Francisco, and I was in Wisconsin. And I wound up doing 2 sessions. One was, could Christianity accommodate a genuine extraterrestrial disclosure? Where I had the surreal experience of going through the gospel, the Romans Road, in front of 500 people at a UFO conference.
Wow.
And then the other one was the Zechariah Sitchin thing. And I was asked to leave.
Really?
Yeah, I was told in no uncertain terms would I ever be invited back. Wow. But nobody vetted me. Nobody did anything like that. I mean, I've since been at other conferences, and they sort of know what they're getting. And I typically go because I'm friendly to the question of extraterrestrial life.
Right.
I don't see it as a theological problem, but I hammer the ancient alien stuff because to me that actually cheapens and makes ridiculous a legitimate question. It's a cartoon. It's the cartoon version of the actual discussion that really needs to happen. So that's sort of how I got, sucked into it. But it's, I'm happy to do it. They're fun. The people at UFO conferences, I can count on one hand the people I've run into that I thought probably needed therapy, like really, or might be dangerous. Wow. Everybody else is just very normal. I offend some people by saying you can have better discussions about spiritual things at a UFO conference than you can at church because people are predisposed to thinking about big picture questions, that are ultimately and inherently theological. So it's a good thing, I think to have, Christians involved in.
And earlier you said, talking about just debunking. Now, you definitely early on set your sights on Mr. Sitchin. Now, I don't consider you somebody who just goes out looking for people to take them out. But why Sitchin?
I had never heard of Sitchin, when I wrote The Facade. I had heard of von Daniken, and I knew, the basics of the ancient alien narrative. But it was like a week or two after I went on, I started getting email about Zecharia Sitchin. So I thought, well, I should look this guy up. And when I came across who he was, I thought, wow, this is like a kindred spirit, an ancient languages guy, into UFO stuff. And so I went out and I got the 12th Planet and I read that, and it was horrible. I mean, it was like every page had a significant coherence problem or abused evidence or just frankly just made stuff up. Wow. And so it actually was kind of a discouraging experience because, and I went on the show and I said this on the show. I said, look, folks, I am what Sitchin pretends to be. Wow. Okay. I know these languages and he's making mistakes that you'd make it as a first year student, even in Hebrew, like biblical Hebrew. He's Jewish. He should know this, like what's going on? So, I saying, I needs to be addressed because he's frankly abusing primary texts. And that is offensive. It's not just the fact that it's the Bible. It's just, you don't get to say the Sumerians believed this or that and completely ignore what they wrote.
Right.
I mean, that you just don't get to do that. I mean, that's just abusing primary texts. It's turning people into liars who are long dead that can't defend themselves. And inside, when you do this, you get inside the UFO speaking circuit group. Mm-hmm. And I've had people that your audience would know that they think would be friendly to Sitchin, and they say terrible things about him. And they're ridiculous things. Oh, he's a disinformation agent. He's an Illuminatist. He was paid by the FBI and the CIA.
He works for the Vatican.
Right. I don't believe any of that stuff. This was a guy who just literally invented a mythology and fell in love with it.
Wow.
And it made him a lot of money too. I mean, that helps. But I don't think he was deeply sinister or anything like that. I just think he bought his own mythology and ran with it
along with him.
Yeah.
So, to this day, I still see people quote. In fact, we're gonna get into that in a minute. So I've seen you do stuff with Eric Mason, Vocab Malone. A lot of people within what we would call the urban apologetic community. Mm-hmm. Did you ever think that your work would be so instrumental in such a niche ministry as urban apologetics?
No, I have to be, transparently honest here. I never thought very much about that what I did would do anything.
Wow.
Because, the UFO stuff was a hobby. The novel was a hobbyist enterprise. I'm into the third one now. I love it. It's the most fun thing I do, but it was like, there was no vision for like where this would lead. There was nothing like that. It was just, let's have some fun now for the next 6 months rather than doing something, academic. But to be honest with you, the novels are like dissertations for me. They're a tremendous amount of research, but it's on my timeline. There's nothing hanging over me to do it. It's just, it's fun and it's creative. But I had no inkling that kind of stuff, the ancient alien stuff, would turn into what it's turned into. In part because when I was at Wisconsin, that's when I remember sending my first email at Wisconsin. I mean, the internet was very young then, and there's YouTube wasn't around. There's no way to imagine what it would turn into. I mean, now that we're on the other side of it, it's like, well, yeah, that this makes a lot of sense, to be doing this sort of thing. But at the time, no, I'd had no vision for it.
Wow. So what I want to do is actually show you why your work has been so instrumental in what we're doing. So let me share my screen real quick. All right. Alrighty. Okay, so, well, that's actually me speaking at my church, and if you see in the corner, I have your face, and I'm quoting you, and they actually let me live, and I was able to, live another day quoting you,
Right. Pitchforks and torches.
There you go. Now, this guy, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He is Malachi York. He's actually in jail right now. He created this system called Nuwabiism. And it's very much, UFO religion with kente cloth, basically. And so this is one of his, what you find in one of his books. So he makes a similar reference to Sitchin, the whole Anunnaki and aliens.
Let's stop with that slide.
Sure, let's go.
Okay, pro tip.
Go for it.
When you're going to associate watchers with Sumerian Mesopotamian supernatural beings, you might want to look at their texts. None of these are watchers to a Sumerian or a Mesopotamian. The watchers is a term associated with the Apkallu, which are lesser divine beings. And we know that because figurines of the Apkallu were found in building, foundation structures, because they were considered good to ward off, evil, demons and things like that. But they're called the Matsare, which means watcher. Okay, watchers are low level, on the Mesopotamian pecking order of supernatural beings. They're not these deities. So, but nobody cared. Nobody cares to actually look up the text.
No, because
let's just make it up.
Because it sounds so sexy, what I mean? So they just gravitate towards it.
Right.
Because anything that sounds supernatural and and sci-fi, people are going to be attracted to it. Here's another slide. Well, actually, this is from Donna Corsi talking about Malachi York. Many of the ideas in York's text are lifted almost word for word from Sitchin with a Nubian twist.
Wow.
York reveals that he traveled here by small passenger crafts called a sham.
Yeah, instead of a shem. Yeah.
Right. Sitchin had written that Nephilim spaceships were called shams. York said it takes the Anunnaki 3,600 years to travel to Earth, the orbit of the planet Murdoch, which the Sumerians called a Shar. In York's version, however, the gods, or Anunnaki, come not from Murdoch, but from the 8th planet Risk in the 19th galaxy. People really believe this, Doctor.
Yeah, no, I know.
People
no,
really believe this.
I absolutely know that. Yeah.
So here's, of course, you're familiar with, Zechariah Sitchin.
Yeah,
Genesis.
I'm just wondering why Sitchin's publisher hasn't gone after him.
Well, he doesn't have any IBN numbers in any of his books. So his books are not
so
in
it would
Amazon.
So it would take the publisher a lot of work to
Exactly.
find exactly. Okay, I get
we're
it.
talking like early 80s.
It's a nice way to cover your butt. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here he quotes, this is from the house where the wind of life is breathed in, the source, no doubt, of the biblical assertion. Then you go to Malachi's The Holy Tablets. This is his version of the Bible. And then he also says this process took place in the laboratory, Shemti, meaning house where the wind of life is breathed in.
This is really insulting to his followers. Like he's creating this stuff under the assumption that they're too stupid or lazy to go look the stuff up.
Right.
I mean, that just feels really insulting.
Absolutely.
But again, anyway, that's just my impression. But go ahead.
And of course, he's not the only one that takes from this UFO religion. So of course, some of the Hebrew Israelites. I want to say some because they're not a monolithic
Right.
people, but a lot of these guys, what we would call, and you heard vocab say it on your show, one West theology, one Westers. So as you see here, the chariots of God, salvation for the Israelites. They got the Independence Day spaceship, and they're getting beamed up. Here's another one, with the rapture. That spaceship are coming. Here's another one. This one's early '80s. Actually, this is like a throwback.
That does look 80-ish. Yeah, look at that.
You have white Jesus. You got the Pope. You got the rabbi.
Yeah, late 70s, early 80s. Yeah.
Looking
Wow.
like Parliament Funkadelic or some kind of
Yeah.
And of course, Nation of Islam also dabbles with this as well. With this, they have this thing called the Will, right? And it's a floating spaceship that shows up like twice a week.
Okay.
So he taught that for the Nation of Islam. So there's certain things that we've have to contend with.
Sure.
In the urban landscape, and again, thank you so much for giving us the ammunition.
All you got to do is ask for primary text.
You'd be surprised how many
kills the
arguments I get
conversation.
with. I get into so many fights when I just say, "Hey, that's great. How did you reach that conclusion?"
Yeah.
Fight completely, and tables are turned, and I'm just asking a question. That's it.
This is why, like on my website, sitchiniswrong.com, I have that exciting screencast video of me going to the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature.
That's my favorite,
Here's how you type in Anunnaki. Hit the button, and it return. I mean, but it gets you all the places where the tablets refer to the Anunnaki, and they're all in English translation. So all you got to do is run the search yourself. You don't have to depend on Mike and be mesmerized by his Ph.D. Okay, you just do the work yourself, hit the button, and then go look.
Right.
And you'll find out that none of Sitchin's claims are actually in the tablets. You don't have to take my word for it.
Right.
I mean, it's just give me the primary sources. And again, that usually kills the conversation, or like you say, it starts a fight.
Automatically.
Yeah.
They come with the ad hominems or the deflections or strongman, or they tell you, do your research. I'm like, well, no, you made the claim. The onus is on you.
Push the button.
Push the button.
Hit the keyboard and push the button,
Oh, man. So now I want to get to your most recent work, Demons. And I have to say, it's in my opinion, it's probably going to be your most controversial work, only because, Christendom at large has a big fascination with the quote-unquote devil. And I really feel like you're tipping over a lot of sacred cows with this book. Did you feel like that was going to be the case when you was writing it?
I thought there'd be a few of those. I sort of assumed that most readers would have read Unseen Realm first. So like the thing about this, Hasatan, the Satan in Job, would have been old information. But if you haven't read that, then that's a classic example where that would be like, holy cow, what in the world's going on? Right. But even without that, this is the only book, both in terms of academic circles and what you'd call a popular audience release, that addresses the problem of the powers of darkness from the perspective of 3 rebellions. And that you will see in academic journal literature, but nobody's ever presented it in a whole book before, so that's totally new. But it will affirm again what we see in the pages of Scripture, but it gives a structure to it that's going to be pretty foreign to people, and that's usually what happens. Is if people are patient with what I'm doing, they'll see that they emerge with their theology intact, but they'll learn that, this argument I used to defend it is really a stupid one, so I'm going to get rid of that now, right, and replace it with something better, or they'll be able to sort of know where these ideas come from, right, in the text and sort of across time when you go through the Hebrew Bible and then intertestamental Judaism on into the New Testament.
Yeah, I actually had a moment with you when it came to that, when you was talking about the sons of God, because I tend to lean towards the Sephite theory. But then when you said in one of your lectures that nowhere is the term B'nai Elohim used for human. So I'm like, he's lying, and I'm going to catch him. So I did my research because I'm going to debunk Dr. Heiser, right? And then when I looked, I'm like, the guy's right. So I had to change, how I saw it. And that really opened up so much more for me, So thank you so much for that. But so this word is very prevalent throughout your recent book. Can you give us a quick little breakdown of this?
Yeah, daimonion is a Greek term. This is actually the plural with the long O at the end. It's a generic term in and of itself. If it was singular, it's kind of like what's kind of like Elohim, just a generic word for a spiritual being. That sort of situation. But in Greek literature, while you could broadly say it could be a good guy or a bad guy, the pattern in Jewish literature of the Hellenistic period, they're writing in Greek then, is that when it's plural, it's almost always, and I don't know that there's no exception. I think in the New Testament there might be an exception or two, maybe outside, but it would be extraordinarily rare. The group are going to be referred to as a plural, and they're always evil. And that's because this is the term of choice for the fallen sons of God, for the sons of God who became corrupt, who were assigned to the nations at Babel. That's a second rebellious group. It's not the same group as Genesis 6. Right. Collectively and as a plural group, they become referred to as daimonion. And so because they're talked about all the time, it sort of ramps up the usage. And it becomes kind of a specific, special word for the black hats of the New Testament. But that happens during the intertestamental period. Even idols are referred to as daimonion.
Right.
The gods of the nations, the fallen, deities over the nations, the sons of God, the watchers, all of them are typically referred to with this term.
Right. So with that understanding, right, we look at this particular scripture that has that word in it, which is 1 Timothy 4, starting in verse 1. Some will depart from the faith. Now the Spirit expressly says that in later times, some will depart from the faith by devoting themselves to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons, though the insincerity of liars whose consciences are shared, who forbid marriage and require abstinence from foods that God created to be received from thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. For everything created by God is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, for it is made holy by the word of God and prayer. And this is what you say about this in your book. It says, 1 Timothy 4:1 is a bit more informative. Now the Spirit especially says that in later times, some will depart from the faith by devoting themselves to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons. The notion that demons led people astray by teaching arise from the Second Temple Jewish theology of the Watchers, who are repeatedly blamed for leading humanity astray via forbidden knowledge. Recall that the demons of the Gospels were disembodied watcher spirits. Paul's association of false teaching and demons is quite consistent with the Second Temple perspective. So, with that being said, is Paul saying that the origin of these false doctrines are coming from these disembodied spirits? Like, is that
he's certainly connecting the two, because if we go back to the Second Temple treatment of the Genesis 6 episode, because this is really what we're talking about. One of the choice terms is watchers, like in the book of Enoch, for the sons of God of Genesis 6. And we tend to fixate on the weird stuff, sons of God, Nephilim, and all that kind of stuff. But the real issue, since the Nephilim lines are eliminated by the time of David, what has longer legs is the connective point between Genesis 6:1 through 4 and Genesis 6:5. Because 6:5 says, and God, saw that the wickedness of, humankind was great upon the earth, and that every imagination of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. Well, how do you get from this Nephilim stuff? Like How do the first 4 verses get to verse 5?
Right.
And the reason is the backstory, again, then this starts with the Mesopotamian Apkallu, because the story is the same,
Right.
is that these sons of God, these watchers who came down and did what they did to pollute, to transgress the boundary of heaven and earth and pollute, humanity, taught them certain things. And you can actually match up what the Apkallu were said to be experts at and what, like, Enoch lists the watchers teaching people, and they match. I mean, all you got to do is look at the Mesopotamian stuff and Enoch stuff, but it's stuff like weapons of warfare and drugs,
seduction.
Okay? Yeah, right. Arts of seduction, altered states, but several of these are specifically focused on idolatry. Now, the sexual thing can be. The drug thing can be because it produces altered states, and you contact other intelligences, and Paul even uses pharmakeia, as a Greek term to talk about that. But certainly astrology and idolatry itself. So these are things that were designed not only to have humans more efficiently destroy themselves and the people around them, but to deflect their attention away from fixing the estranged relationship between them and the true God. Right. So the teaching leads to the worship of anything else but Yahweh. And again, worshiping the sun, moon, and stars. In their cosmology, that of course is worshiping other divine beings as well. So this is where you get your flow of idolatry from. It really ramps it up. And so when Paul connects false teaching, which he always connects with something that's not the gospel, okay? Something to steer your believing loyalty away from Jesus to something else that will not save you. Okay, this to him is rooted in this effort to get people in the Old Testament period away from the true God, a relationship with the true God, and to turn their hearts toward worshiping other gods.
So when Paul tells Timothy this, so Timothy wouldn't be shocked at the origin of these teachings.
No, but both on the Greco-Roman side and on the Jewish side, everybody is familiar with this story, this worldview, that you have supernatural intelligences teaching people certain things to either result in worshiping them, okay, or again, some behavior that will be sort of mixed in with idolatry. So that, this is sort of like paganism or idolatry 101. Sort of the source material for how you do paganism, how you do idolatry, how you worship other gods comes from the gods themselves. It's not random. It's directed. Okay. It's intelligent. It's intentional. It's not accidental. So no, this wouldn't have been a surprise at all. In fact, the other phrase in the passage, deceitful spirits, it's actually wandering, spirits. And, just that descriptive term, to quote Peter, they left their first estate. They left their rightful domain. They wandered. Okay. They wandered away. They went astray, and now they lead other people astray. So even a description like that speaks of supernatural beings who aren't where who left where they were supposed to be, did what they weren't supposed to do. Right. And that includes, again, the things that they taught humans, again, to worship them instead of the true God.
So now that we've exegeted that text properly, how do we bring that concept into the modern day believer? Like what insight can we get from understanding the nefarious origins of false teachings?
Yeah, the best way to detect it, the best way to detect error and lies is to know truth really well. Okay, because if you do that, then you can see where truth is being fiddled with or altered or misdirected. So I think that's probably the most immediate thing that we could do in terms of a response. We need to know what Scripture says really well, so as to be able to detect when someone is fudging it or fiddling around with it. Right. So that would be the first thing, but also realize that, the average person, isn't sort of doing occult stuff or esoteric belief systems. Whether they realize it or not, because of popular media, their thinking is affected by those things. Okay, I mean, you were talking about ancient aliens earlier. Well, it's easy to poke fun at it because the research is so terrible. I mean, when your own writers say that this show is a joke, you know you have a problem as far as the truth telling of it. But it's so seductive because it provides a worldview for people who don't want Judeo-Christianity, and they don't want scientific materialism either. This is sort of a middle ground. It preserves mystery and transcendence. And so you get your ears tickled. You wonder about certain things. You forget that questions aren't answers. They're questions, okay? And so it gains its own hearing, and it steers people's minds and the way they think about important questions. It steers them down a certain path. So even people who would look at a show like Ancient Aliens and think, well, that's ridiculous, it still influences the way you process other information and the way you process questions, and ultimately the way you process things like the Bible, because the Bible gets looped into it.
Right.
So if you're not trained to think well about the Bible, chances are really high you're going to think poorly about it. And your popular media, whether it's Ancient Aliens that poses as nonfiction,
Right,
or at least says it isn't fiction.
So their job is basically
and pop culture is going to do that.
Their job is basically have you feel disenchanted about the Bible, and it kind of stripped the Bible of its spirituality because we found this alternative spirituality over here.
Right. The objective, again, if I were a cosmic evil being, my job is actually pretty easy. I'm going to get you to suspect from your authority, to suspect your authority figures are either hiding something from you or they're somewhat inept. They don't know. Because I'm going to get you to fixate not only on questions that are difficult for most, again, pastors and authority figures, but I'm also going to get you to fixate on the answers that I want to plant in your head to answer your own questions. So that your discussion now turns from, I want to know the truth about this thing, to, well, let's hear it, Pastor. Prove to me that the Anunnaki didn't land here, 3,600 years. You know what I mean? It's this kind of thing.
And the pastor is like a deer caught in headlights.
Right. I mean, right. And since they are the deer caught in the headlights, since they aren't spending 20 hours a week watching Ancient Aliens, thank God. Okay. Since they're not doing that, a lot of times they're not going to know what to say. And then again, you're led to suspect that, oh, yeah, I've stumbled on a truth that no one, they were keeping this from me, or I'm just, I'm special. I found this out, or I'm really smart, or, right. It's just it's a self-deception. It turns into a self-deception at that point.
It's similar to the whole Gnostic understanding, right? I got this secret teaching.
You're looking within. You're looking within. It's this exploration of quote unquote self-discovery, but ultimately you're looking in for knowledge and your own personal enlightenment, that this becomes, synonymous with your path to salvation. And it's part of the real seduction of it, because, hey, it would be kind of nice to think that I'm actually a god and just didn't know it. Why is that a horrific thought, to most people? It sounds like kind of sweet, or, boy, I hope that's the case, Right. It appeals.
It's looking for affirmation because they feel like they can't be affirmed.
And there's no accountability.
That's right.
There's absolutely no accountability to it.
Right. And it's like a theological gumbo, right? You could sprinkle a little Gnosticism, a little Ancient Aliens, mix it up, and it's your own concoction. Right?
Yeah, well, Ancient Aliens is basically occult, esoteric, Gnostic worldview repackaged in a 21st century technological presentation. That's really what it is. If the 19th century had never happened, if we never had Lovecraftian horror, and Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons and all these people, if they had never existed, you wouldn't have an Ancient Alien show. Right. They'd have nothing to draw on. They'd have to depend on their own creativity, which they're not very good at. But it's a pool from which they draw and then repackage it. That's all they're doing.
So, in your opinion, and I think you're probably actually doing this in real time now that you've been the executive director for I forgot the name of the church that you're.
The Celebration Church. Yeah, it's the Awakening School of Theology and Ministry.
Right. So how would just a local church equip themselves to be inoculated from these type of Gnostic teachings?
Well, I think shows like yours ought to be known and promoted. Okay, they ought to be used and repurposed in, Sunday school, in youth group. This is what young people are watching, and not just young people either. I mean, you got plenty of baby boomers into this stuff.
Sure.
But this is what people are getting, whether they're doing it intentionally or not. You can't basically get through a day without running into this. You spend any time on the internet, you're gonna get some sort of exposure to an alternate Jesus, or no Jesus at all, or an occult Jesus, or the ancient alien thing. I mean, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So why not take the handful of people who are devoting themselves to trying to address it in some way and use their content? Have them in to speak. Play it, 5 minutes, on a Sunday morning in a Sunday school class. So let's talk about this. This is, at the very least, it's a bridge into, big picture discussion. Who are we? How did we get here? What's the image of God? These are significant, fundamental theological questions that get distorted and abused with regularity, on these shows.
Right.
So I think at the very least, we ought to be using it as a bridge, but I would be in favor of making it content. I mean, actually making it content. This is what we're going to do in second year at the Awakening School. We're going to focus on what I call postmodern apologetics, where, we're going to spend, 4 weeks or whatever, 6 weeks on, Jesus mythicism, the zeitgeist stuff,
Right.
because people run into that. And the average pastor hasn't spent, any time thinking about it. And it's not adequate for someone who's watched 20 hours of this stuff to have their pastor say, well, that just isn't true. That's not adequate. Okay, you have to show people why it's not true.
So the ministers need to get some training.
They do.
Totally agree. So, I know you're busy. I want to keep this as short as possible. I was wondering if you could take a couple of questions from the chat.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we have the good doctors in the building. So if you have any questions for him pertaining to the subject matter, all right? I gotta say that. Actually, Benjamin said a statement here. It says, wait, MichaelHeiser is familiar with Lovecraftian horror? I need to hear more about this.
Yeah. Well, I love At the Mountains of Madness. I mean, there are several. That's a good example of Lovecraft, not just playing with, but sort of fathering and nurturing an astronaut and alien Cthulhu mythos. There's a lot. If you're interested in this topic. Jason Colavito, who is not a Christian. I think Jason, he may even be an atheist. I'm not sure. But he and I, chat periodically. But nobody has done more in this area of debunking ancient aliens and History Channel stuff than Jason has. And he has a whole book called Cult of Alien Gods, where he traces all of the ancient aliens themes through Lovecraftian horror and 19th century, horror fiction. Wow. It's awesome. I mean, it shows you just point blank where they're getting their ideas. It's 19th century occultism and occult literature.
Patrick asks, are there any books that would be a good starting point to learn more? I mean, besides your own.
About what specifically do you think? Is there any?
Yeah, Patrick, can you specify exactly?
If it's the biblical worldview we've been talking about, I would recommend starting at Supernatural and then moving to Unseen Realm. If it's sort of themes in pop culture that deal with, the whole extraterrestrial visitation or, ancient alien kind of thing, one of the books I recommend is Our Gods Wear Spandex. Don't let the cover fool you. It's actually a really good book. It traces all the ancient astronaut themes through like superheroes, the Marvel and the DC universe. So it's a really good, readable introduction to how comic books transmit this worldview. So it would depend on what precisely he's asking.
Okay. Do you recommend a translation of the Book of Enoch?
Yeah, I recommend the one by Vanderkam and Nicholsberg. It's on Amazon. I don't know, it's $14-15. It is the most up-to-date translation that there is. Where it comes from is those guys wrote commentaries on Enoch, and then the publisher stripped out the translation they made for the commentary and sold it separately. So it's a nice little trim little paperback. If you don't want to pay anything, there's still Charles. It's in public domain.
Right.
I've written a commentary on Enoch, and I use Charles just because it's public domain, but I interact with the other one.
Okay.
But the Vanderkam and Nicholsberg short little paperback, it's the cheapest way to go, and it's the best one.
Cool. From Servant of Christ Ministries, what has been the most difficult or uncomfortable circumstance of his experience, your experience, in which he found it difficult to share the insightful thoughts and discoveries he has made in Scripture?
Boy, that's a tough question. I'll answer it this way. I'm not a bull in a china closet, so I typically don't get uncomfortable. I mean, I refuse to protect Christians from their Bible and all that sort of thing. But I'll answer it this way, that sometimes there have been situations where I just know that I need to be extra careful, with the way something is presented, because you can usually tell when the way a person asks a question that they're not quite ready to sort of process the information. So the most difficult thing is trying to discern where the person is entering the conversation. So in other words, how much Bible is really under their belt. Mm-hmm. How sensitive are they to thinking sort of outside the box of their tradition that they're in? Because I don't ever recommend people leave their churches. I don't ever recommend people do stuff like that. Right. I am not here to shoot at anybody's denomination. I don't endorse any. I don't shoot at any. Okay, I'm trying to get people zeroed in on the meta narrative of Scripture, and so sometimes it's difficult to know how ready they are for the discussion. If it's lost people, like Coast to Coast is it's live and uncensored. People ask you the craziest stuff in the world. So I don't shy away from that. I try to be gentle. I try to affirm something with every questioner, even if I think they're drunk when they're asking it. But you try to build a bridge somewhere and then just be honest with them. What I tend to do is I'll tell people, okay, here are the 5 things that I need you to demonstrate to me for me to switch sides and come over to you. In other words, I give them homework. Now, I might be thinking, you don't have a prayer of ever producing any of that. But it's a way of affirming the value of their question, right? That there is something to think about here. So if you can do this for me, I'll switch for you.
If they can explain their worldview.
Yeah.
Right. So great. So Carmel wants to know, why can't the Satan in Job develop into Satan? I think she means Satan, maybe.
Yeah. First of all, you don't need the Satan, Hasatan in Job 1 and 2. You don't need him to be Satan to have Satan. What you have going for your listeners to whom this question might be totally off the wall or unfamiliar, in Job 1 and 2, and we'll throw Zechariah 3 into this. Hebrew is like English. It does not allow a definite article. That's the word the, or whatever. In Hebrew, it's ha, okay? It doesn't allow a definite article in front of a proper personal name. Like, I'm not the Mike.
Right.
It doesn't, my wife isn't the Drina. We don't talk like that. The English just doesn't tolerate that, and neither does Hebrew. So if you have ha in front of Satan, that tells you it cannot be a proper personal name. And every time Satan occurs in Job 1 and 2 and Zechariah 3, it has the definite article. So what you actually have there, and modern translations will some of them will put the adversary. In other words, they won't use a proper personal name. They'll either have the adversary or the Satan, or in a footnote, they'll have that. And what they're trying to do is communicate the fact that this isn't a proper personal name. It's like an office. It's a function or a role of a heavenly being in this meeting. So the Hasatan in Job 1 and 2 is actually doing his job. It's actually part of the motif of God's heavenly, bureaucracy running to and fro throughout the whole earth and looking at people who are obedient and disobedient. Because this is what God asked Hasatan. Hey, have you considered my servant Job? First he asked, where you been? I've been running to and fro throughout the whole earth. So he's doing his job. Where he crosses the line is when he questions God's assessment of Job. Because now we've accused God of two things. You either don't really know Job. That's questioning his omniscience, or you don't want us to know. That's questioning his integrity. So he crosses the line and has to be put in his place, and that's the whole rest of the book. Job has no idea what's going on, but what happens to him is because God's integrity has to be defended. But you don't need any of that to have the devil. I believe they're in the personal New Testament devil. What happens is the rebel of Genesis 3, as time goes on, gets called different things. Okay, in the garden he's Nachash. Okay, he's the serpent. Later on in the Second Temple period, he gets called Mastema. He gets called Belial, the worthless one. He gets Beliar is a different way to spell it. He gets called Satan. Okay, which is the adversary, the one who opposes God. He gets called Diabolos, the liar, the slanderer. All of these terms fit him. They all describe who he is and what he does and what he did. So this is where you get the New Testament capital S Satan, because by the time you get into the first century, some of these terms have become names. For the people of the Dead Sea Scrolls, they refer to the original rebel as Belial, the worthless one. New Testament writers, it's Diabolos, it's the devil or Satan.
Right.
Okay, and some of them use serpent as well. My point is that the doctrine isn't built on the terminology you select and when you select it. It doesn't matter when a term comes into use or wasn't in use before. You still have a rebel. You still have someone who opposed God. And eventually all the terms stick. The shoes fit, so wear them. This is what you are. And this is how we're going to refer to you now, to highlight, again, the adversarial nature.
And again, this is where it really helps defending the faith, because, again, talking about some of the Hebrew Israelites, one of their creedal statements is that the white man is the devil that the Bible speaks of. Right? So now, okay, so when you say devil, can you break that down? Are you saying that he's the Nakash? In fact, I've actually heard a Hebrew Israelite say that the Nakash in the garden is actually the white man. So go figure. No, and he was serious. He was dead serious.
I believe it. I believe he was serious, but it's still funny. It cracks me up how white people just sort of wind up everywhere. And then like on the next day that we don't want the white people to be anywhere. So it's like
make up your mind.
Right, just pick one.
Pick one. Cool. So I'm gonna. This is gonna be the last question because it's really deep, and I think it's a good way to end it. It says here, Can Mike give us a brief summary of our purpose here as believers in Christ and its implications in sharing the Gospels with a lost world?
Yeah, I think, I think all the stuff that I do, I hope, and again, I get a lot of feedback, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think this is happening. It helps people get a better idea of their identity, that we are images of God, and so as all people are images of God. There's equality. The fragmentation that we have in our world is something destructive and not what God wants at all. So we need to approach everyone as an estranged imager, somebody that God originally wanted in his family, and now it's time to redeem them. So I think it helps with who we are, our imaging, our status, how God looks at us, our mission and our destiny, all of this. I think spiritual warfare is the Great Commission. Okay, and that I try to unpack that in the Demons book, because if you think that the world is the way it is because of these three rebellions and this panoply of bad guys and black hats and whatnot, then you expect the Messiah to fix all three. And we tend to only look at the gospel as being the solution for individual sins or sinners. It's a lot bigger than that. I mean, it actually does address all three rebellions very specifically. And so what we really have is spiritual warfare isn't about exorcisms. It's not about shouting at demons. It's not about doing rituals and incantations. And you may find yourself in that situation where you have to speak truth to lies and it might be a demon. Okay, I understand that. But at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what do the powers of darkness fear? They don't fear you. They don't fear you shouting at them. They don't fear music. What they fear is they fear the diminishment of their kingdom, because Paul linked the Great Commission to the fullness of the Gentiles. That was his mission. When the fullness of the Gentiles have been regathered in, when Babel has been reversed, then Israel will have its awakening, and quote, and then the end will come. Okay, then and the end, the day of the Lord, is linked in Psalm 82 to the death of the gods, the destruction of the powers of darkness. This is what they fear. So the longer they can keep the Great Commission from gaining steam, the longer they can forestall its success, the more they can distract people from believing, the more that they can distract believers from doing the Great Commission, the better off they are. They get to stay alive. They know they can't beat God. I often get asked, well, do the demons think they can win? Well, it depends how you define win. They don't think they're bigger than God. They know that. But if win means we just keep kicking that Great Commission can down the road, wow, and we stay alive, we can do that. So that is what they fear. And so that's where we need to concentrate.
Each day alive is a victory for the other side.
Yep.
Wow. That was amazing. But before you go, Dr. Heiser, this is your time to shameless plug away. What's coming down the pike for Dr. Heiser?
Well, the near term is registrations are open for the Awakening School of Theology and Ministry for the fall. Mm-hmm. We had our first semester that actually ended last week. We had 800 students, 700 were online, and that's where most of them will be. Right. The first year we go through the content of Unseen Realm. We take 30 weeks to do that. And then the second year is some of this apologetic, kind of stuff. It's not an accredited degree. It's just for lay people in the church. Okay. If you want to learn this stuff, then let's go do that. So that's the near term. I don't have any, books near to launching. I'm actually working on 3 as we speak. Demons is new. So that's going to, that'll sort of draw attention for a while, right. But I'm hoping to finish at least 2 of the 3 by the end of the year. One of them is the second volume of the Enoch Reader's Commentary. And that's just a reader's commentary is like, if I were there in the room and you were reading Enoch, me just explaining this or that to you. Understand the book. Right. I'm into the 3rd novel, science fiction that's sort of a theological thriller, with a science fiction UFO bent to it. Then Facade is number 1, Portent is number 2, and I'm into the 3rd one now. And then I'm doing a book on what scholars would call astral prophecy and sacred calendar, specifically to address the way those things are abused in modern end times sensationalism. So I'm trying to focus on those. But Fringe Pop, we're back to filming Fringe Pop. I leave in 2 weeks to do that since the quarantine's over. So people can go check that out on the YouTube channel. But all this stuff, the homepage is drmsh.com. DR is in doctor, and then my initials, drmsh.com. And you can find out, about all the stuff I'm into. I should mention MiCLAT, my nonprofit. That's miqlat.org. I pay to translate everything that I write that I have rights to so that we can post it on that site and give it away for free. So we have Supernatural in over 20 languages. We have What Does God Want? That's for new believers in another 8 or 10. So that's what we're trying to do. I'm trying to produce as much content as I can and give away as much of it as I can, so people get it.
Right. Okay, a good friend of mine is really want a final question. So, Carmel,
Is this
what is
vocab?
no, it's not vocab. It's not vocab. Carmel, what is your question? And this will be the
Okay.
last
Okay.
because we're friends. So I'm gonna give you this one shot. What is your question, Carmel? I think she said it earlier. Let me see if I can find it. Okay. I want his insight on what he thinks of the popular atheist argument saying we are all atheists. We only believe in one less God than you.
Yeah, I would say that is an awesome display of self-deception, because if they hadn't noticed, okay, there are no atheists like in India. Okay, I mean, as the world trends more secular, and there are actually sociologists and scholars of religion who write on this. Like Christopher Partridge has 2 volumes on something called the Reenchantment of the West, where he basically shows that as the world becomes more secular, it actually becomes more spiritual. There's a re-enchantment. Now, what that means is they don't want the traditional Judeo-Christian God.
Right.
Okay, but they are dissatisfied with scientific materialism because it offers no mystery, no transcendence at all. And so they are looking everywhere for something bigger than themselves. The militant atheist crowd is a small group trying to pretend that the rest of humanity doesn't exist. That's what it's trying to do. The proof is all around them that people aren't buying it. So they can come up with a pithy saying like this, but reality is still going to bite them in the butt every time. So come up with another pithy saying and look around you, because everywhere you look, there's going to be a contrary example.
Wow. That was great. Thank you so much. So with that being said, again, Dr. Heiser, thank you so much for your time. Definitely appreciate this. This is definitely a bucket list moment for me, you know. So because I'm always quoting.
You're easily pleased.
Low maintenance. I'm low maintenance. Yes,
You're
sir.
low maintenance. Yeah.
So with that being said, guys, it's been Dr. Heiser and BK Apologist signing off.